So today's daf is daf Yud Dalet, and we're talking about a case of a shor that was owned by the mashil and was mazik the shor of the shoel. And the question is, the shoel l'chora is responsible for the animal going out and being mazik. So in that case, the mashil certainly shouldn't have to pay. But the Gemara says that it's a case where the shoel was makabel shmiras gufo. That means he's responsible that the animal shouldn't be damaged, but he wasn't makabel shmiras nezikin. He made a stipulation that I'm not in charge of nezikin. You, the mashil, still remain in charge of the possibility that the shor will go out, and that's called on the top of daf yidal lo kibel alav shmiras nezakav. So the Gemara asks the following kasha: if the Bryce is talking about a case where he wasn't makabel shmiras nizakin aim a sefer, we won't be able to understand the sefer. The sefer says niftav alaylo partua listim v'yotzav izika patu. In other words, if there was a situation of ones where the animal broke loose at night and he didn't know anything about it, or listim came and broke through and took the animal, and then the animal went out and was mazik, then the shomer doesn't have to pay. And the implication is, the diuk is ha bayom chayev. If there was any element of less than ones, then he has to pay. And why does he have to pay? Olo kibul all of shmiras nizakav. And we'll see if we can somehow separate the ratio from the sefer. Hachi komar. The Gemara answers that we can interpret the brisa in such a way: Im kibel olav shmiras nizakav chayev. In a situation where the shomer accepted upon himself that he'll protect the animal from going out and damaging, then the shomer has to pay the tashlumei nezek. But in that case, niftzov alaylo shepertu listiv v'yotzav izika patu. In the case of an ones, he doesn't have to pay. So the Gemara says, Eini. Let's take a look at Rabbi Lazar, and let's see if we can raise an objection to Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar is the one who holds that in the case of a chatzah shutfim, where both the mazik and the nizak have rights to the chatzah, equal rights, then there's a ptur, there's no chiyuv of nizkei shein v'regel, because the Torah says ubir b'stei acher, and this is not called stei acher. And that's the sheet of Rabbi Elazar, the Amora Rabbi Elazar. So Gemara asks from a brisa, Eini, is this really so that there's no chiyuv of shein v'regel in the case of a chotzah shutfim? For Tani, we have a brisa that was brought by Rav Yosef that says exactly the opposite. It says chotzah shutfim v'hapundak chayiv bahem al shein v'al regel. So if this chatzah is jointly owned in a partnership between the mazik and the nizak, and also in the case of a pundak is what we call an achsanya. Achsanya is a place where travelers will stay. And now the mazik was the shor of one of these two shutfim, or one of the orchim who are staying in the pundak. And the brisa says, chayiv bahem al shein ve'al regel. Now, what that means is that this is not called a Rishus HaRabim. It's a privately owned Chotzer or Fundak. And despite the fact that it's a Chotzer Shutfim, nevertheless, there's a Chiyuv Shein V'Regel, and it's considered Bir B'Stei Acher. Tiyuv to the Rabbi Lazar. Amalecha Rabbi Lazar, V'Tizbra, Masnisa, Milo Pligi. Okay, I concede that you found a brisa that contradicts my principle of chatzah shutfim being chayav. My chatzah shouldn't be part according to Rabbi Lazar, but I do have a brisa to sustain my opinion, and that brisa apparently contradicts the brisa that you're quoting. V'Tanya, we have a brisa. Arba klolos hayirab Shimon Elazar Omer bin Izakin. There were four rules or principles that were formulated by Reb Shimon ben Elazar regarding Nizakin. And each one is going to be analyzed separately by the Gemara. The first principle is Kol Shuhu Reshus La Nizak V'Lola Mazik, which means that the Mazik had no right to enter into this area, which is a private area that is owned by the Nizak, Chai Bakol. What does Chai Bakol mean? That even Keren, which normally pays on the first three occasions of Negicha Chatzi Nezek, here he will pay Nezek Sholem. Now we have the second klal. Mazik v'lo Nizak. The area is dedicated and is owned by the Mazik. And the Nizak had no right to enter there into that area with his shor. And then what happens is that the Nizak, in a sense, takes upon himself responsibility for any Nezek that takes place. So if the shor, the Mazik, kills the shor, the Nizak, Potter, the Mazik says, I don't have to pay you. Mikol, I don't have to pay you at all. You had no right to enter into my Rishus. Tarcha Bershusi, my boy. Klal Shlishi. Lazeh v'lazeh. What happens if the Chatzer belongs to both the Mazik and the Nizak in partnership? That's our case that we're dealing with Rabbi Lazar. Kigon Chatzar Shutfim. Ve'habika. Bika is a place where people graze their cows. And it's open for everybody. Potter ba ala shein v'ala regel. If it's not a mokum amyuchad la nizak, then it's not ubir b'stei acher. B'stei acher means in the sod of the nizak, but here the mazik has equal rights as a shutov to that chotzer. That's as far as shein v'regel is concerned. Ala negifa v'ala negifa v'ala neshicha v'ala revitz v'ala be'ita, all the keren and toltosera, as we will enumerate it back on Daf Beis Amid Beis, is Tam Mishalim Chatzi Nezek, Umud Mishalim Nezek Sholem. In other words, as far as Keren is concerned, Keren is Chayev in Rishus HaRabim. So even if I want to consider that this is not Ubir B'stei Acher because it's not exclusively dedicated to the Nizak, and therefore let's give it the status of Rishus HaRabim, well, the din of Keren in Rishus HaRabim is that a Tam pays Chatzi Nezek, and a Mu'ed pays Nezek Sholem. Fourth klal. Lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. What about an area where it's privately owned, but neither the Mazik nor the Nizak have rights to go in there? Kigon, Chatzah she'ena shel shneim. Okay, now the Nizak's status is no worse than that of the Mazik. And therefore, you could call it Ubir B'stei Acher, he's Chayv al Hashem vala regel, but on Negicha Neshicha, Negifa Revitza and Be'ita, Tam Mishalim Nezek Chatzi Nezek, Umud Mishalim Nezek Sholem. All right, so this last klal is going to be the subject of the sugya later on. In any event, what did the Gemara get from this brisa? Ketani Mias, if you look at the klal Shlishi, it says Chatzah Shutfiv Adbika Potter Bala Sheval Regel. This is an exact, identical view of that of Rabbi Lazar. That in a case of a Chatzah Shutfim, there's no Chiyuv of Shein V'Regel. It's not considered Ubir B'stei Acher. So now Rabbi Lazar is covered, meaning he has a brisa to stand on. On the other hand, we had another brisa that seem to contradict this price. So the Gemara wants to see now, although Rabbi Lazar is covered, he's protected. Kashana Dodi, can we somehow reconcile the two prices? And the Gemara answers, Kitanya he, that price which says, like Rabbi Lazar, that in the Klal Shlishi of Rabbi Shimon Elazar, Shein V'Regel P'turim B'Chatzah Shutfim, that's a chatzah hamyuchedes or miyuedes in Hebrew, lazeh v'lazeh. It's shutfis of both the mazik and the nizak for all uses, for all purposes. Bein leperos ubein lishvar. Notice you can take your fruits and put it into that chotzer, and you can bring your shar into that chotzer. So since they both have reshus, the mazik and the nizak, to both bring in their peros and their oxen, therefore it has the status of Rishus HaRabim. It's not Ubir B'stei Acher because the Nizak doesn't have any superior rights to this area. They both have rights to the area. And it's like a Rishus HaRabim and Shem V'Regel Potter. Hi. What about the brisa of Rabbi Yosef that makes Shem V'Regel Chayav in a case of Chatzah Shutfim, but Chatzah miuchedes leperos, v'eino miuchedes leshvarim. That means you're allowed to bring into that chotzer of both the mazik and the nizak, peros, but not shvarim. So you're not allowed to bring shvarim in there. And therefore, as far as legabi niske shein, havi le chotzer nizak. In other words, the nizak is allowed to bring his peros there. The mazik is not allowed to bring his shar there. And therefore, this is considered bir b'steyacha, because when the mazik allows his shar to go into the chotzer of the nizak, and no one's allowed to bring shvarim in there, therefore he's going to be chayiv to pay the damages for a chotzer nizak. And why is it called a chotzer nizak? Because the nizak has rights to bring his peros there. Now let's notice that the nizak does not have any rights that exceed beyond the rights of the mazik, but that doesn't bother me as long as the mazik is illegal in bringing his shar into this chotzer, and yet the nizak has access to this chotzer, then it's considered ubir v'steyachet. Deka nami. And now the Gemara is going to look carefully at the language of the brisa. One brisa, excuse me, is going to use the language of bika, and the other brisa uses the language of funda. The Ketani hacha in Rav Yosef's brisa that says Yachayef in his keshev regel and a chatzah shutfim, it says hafunda, which means it's a chatzah dumya de funda. And what does that mean? Fundak is a place, as we said, where people who pass through the town, let's say they sell their merchandise, and they come with their merchandise, and they don't bring behemos into a fundak. They don't want to be mazik any of their schora, their expensive merchandise that they bring into the fundak. So animals are not allowed in. And therefore, it becomes a chotzer, which is like a rishus hanizak mazik, and it's a fundak. Both the mazik and the nizak have rights to that chotzer, and therefore the brisa of Yosef says that yechayef is shein v'regel, and it's dumya the fundak. But hasam, ketani hasam, in the brisa of Shimon ben Elazar, the klolim, where the third klal was that you're part of it is shein v'regel v'chotzer shutfim, there it's dumya the bika. There, the brisa of Shimon ben Elazar uses the word bika. And what is bika? Bika means that everybody has rishus to bring their animals into this area. And therefore, this chatzah shutfim is a rishus rabin. So therefore, the halacha is that the mazik is potter because it's not ubir b'steyachem. B'steyachem lafukei rishus rabin shma mina, and therefore the Gemara is happy. Maskif lo Rav Zera kevon de miuchedes leperos. If you're telling me that the chotzer in that brisa is miuchedes leperos, meaning you're not allowed to bring your shvarim in, then he should be potter from shein v'regel. Ha be'inon ubir b'steyachar v'leka. After all, this chotzer is shaykh to the mazik no less than it is to the nizak. So the mazik has equal rights to bring in his peros there. So that's not called stay acher. Why then is he patur? I'm sorry. Why then is he chayav? I meant to say we should patur because it's not ubir b'stay acher because the mazik has rights to bring his peros there. Amalei Abaye kevan di enam yuchedes l'shvarim stay acher krinabe. Since, as we said earlier, the mazik violated his rights by bringing his shar into this area, that makes it into steyacher. And therefore, he's chayav even though it's a chotzer meshutefes. Now, earlier, the Gemara tried to reconcile the contradiction between the brisos with regard to the chiyuv shein v'regel b'chotzer shutfim, that if the chotzer is designated and earmarked solely for peros, then it's considered like the chotzer nizak, and it's a rishus hamyuchedes leperos and l'shvarim. That would be already a rishus harab. So the Gemara now wants to clarify is this derech available for us to possibly reconcile Rav Chizda and Rav Elazar? Back on Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, the sugya that we did yesterday, there was a machlokus between Rav Chizda and Rav Elazar about whether Shein V'Regel is chayiv and shotva fruitman, chotza shutman. Amalei Rav Acham Yidifti Ravina Lema Midamas Nisa Lo Pligi. If you reconcile the two braisos, is Amaroi Nami Lo Pligi. We could just as well reconcile the two Amarayim, Rav Chizda, Rav Elazar. Each one is saying his din in a different scenario. Rav Chizda is talking about a scenario in which the Chatzah Meshutefes is only Meshutefes for Peiros and not for Shvarim. And therefore it has the din of Rishus HaYochid, and the Mazik has no rights to bring his Shvarim in there, and that's why he's going to be Chayav for Shein V'Regel according to Rav Chizda. But Rabbi Elazar, who says he's part of a Shein V'Regel and a Chatzah Shutfim, he's talking about a case where they have rights not only for Peiros, but also for Shvarim, and therefore it's Rishus HaRabim Amalein. And Ravina responded to Rav Acha, yes, you are right, it's possible that there's no machlokas Amoraim. Each one is talking about a different Chatzah Shutfim. Now the Gemara says, V'yimtim tzalom pligi, and if you will insist that they argue one or the other about a Chatzah Shutfim, then what is the Yisod HaPlugta? What are they arguing about? Bekushid, Rabbi Zero, Bepiruka, de Abai Pligi. Their machlokas is in the two svaras. The svara of Rav Zera in his kasha, and the svara of Abai in his teretz, meaning that Rabbi Elazar holds like the svara of Rav Zera in his kasha. And a chatzah meshutefes only for Peiros is considered Rishus HaRabim, and your potter for Shein V'Regel. And that was the logic that underlined Rav Zera in his kasha. Rav Chizda, on the other hand, holds like the Svar of Abai, who answered Rav Zera, that since the Mazik is not allowed to bring his shar there, then it's like the Chatzah and Nizak, and he's chayav for Shein V'Regel. But it comes out that if you have a Chatzah that's miuchedes for both Peiros and Shvarim, everybody would agree that it's considered Rishus HaRabim and your potter for Shein V'Regel. Gufa, now we go back to the Brisa of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Our book, Klolis Hoy Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Omer ben Ezekin, Kol Shuhu Rishus LaNizak, V'lo Lamazik Chai Bakol. So the Gemara says, the language of the Brisa is a little bit strange. It shouldn't have said Ala Kol. It shouldn't have said Chayav Bakol, but rather it should have said Chayav Al Hakol, which would imply that he's chayav for all avos nezikin. Lo ketani, it doesn't say that. Ella, but rather it says chayav bakol. What does that mean, bakol? Bakol means he has to pay the entire damage, not chatzi nezek, but nezek sholem. And that's called in the Lashon HaShas, but kulei nezek, the entire nezek. So the Tan is coming to be machadish, an unbelievable chiddush, that even in an area where, generally speaking, you only pay chatzi nezek, which is the case of Keren Tam, here, because the nezek was in the Chatzah and Nizak, you have to pay nezek sholem. So that's the chiddush of this klal, which is the first of the four klalim, namely, Kol Shu Rishus LaNizak V'lo Lamazik. The Mazik had no right to bring his shor into the Rishus LaNizak, therefore he has to pay nezek sholem for Keren on the first negicha. Mani Rabbi Tarfani. And this reflects the sheet of Rabbi Tarfan on Daf Chav Dalet and Beis. The Omar Meshuna B'Chatzah Nizak Nezek Shalom Mishalim. If the animal is Meshuna B'Keren, Keren is always called Meshuna, it's Lav Urche as opposed to Shein V'Regel. And if the Hezek took place in the Chatzah Nizak, and the Mazik had no right to take a shor into the Chatzah Nizak, then according to Rabbi Tarfan, he pays Nezek Shalom right away. So it's not a Rishus HaRabim where you pay Chatzi Nezek on the first three Negichas, but rather it's the private Rishus of the Nizak, and therefore you pay Nezek Shalom from the first Negicha of Keren. Frek the Gemara, if you're going to tell me the Brisa of Rabbi Elazar, of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, is a reflection of the Shita Rabbi Tarfon, Ema Seifa, how you going to interpret the Klal Haravi, the fourth Klal? What does it say in the fourth klal? Lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. If neither the mazik nor the nizak have a shus to go in there, kigon chotz sheina shel shneim chayev al hashen v'al keren. Now, what does that mean? Lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. My lo lezeh. I lema lo lezeh v'lo lezeh klal eladi acher. If this chotzer doesn't belong neither to the mazik nor to the nizak, but rather to a third party, and the nizak put his peiros there without rights to do so, and the shor, the mazik, entered into that chotzer that belongs to an adam shlishi, had no rights to do so, and he ate the peiros. So the Gemara says that's impossible. How could you tell me that chayav al hashem v'regel v'be'ino b'stei acher? We need it to be in the sod of the nizak. That's very interesting that the word acher, it doesn't mean a third party, it dafka means the nizak, v'leka. This chatzah belongs to a third party, not to the nizak. Ela pshita, we have no choice but to assume that the Bryce is talking dechad, it belongs to one of the two of them. And if the Baal Hashor Mazik is going to be Chai Feshein V'Regel, it must mean that this Chatzah belongs to the Nizak, and the Mazik had no right to go in there with his Shor. So the Gemara now asks the Kasha, Ketani B'Seifa, it says now in the Klal Ravi, Tam Mishalim Chatzi Nezik, Umu Mishalim Nezik Shalim. Ason L'Rabbana, that's against Rabbi Tarfon. Because Rabbi Tarfon holds that in a case of Mishuna, Bechotza Nizak, you pay already on the first Negicha, Nezik Shalim. Here it says you pay Chatzi Nezik, that's Rabbanan, who argue and reject Rabbi Tarfon. The Amri Mishuna Karen Bechotza Nizak, Chatzi Nezik Mishalim. So Reisha, Rabbi Tarfon, V'Seifa, Rabbanan in. Gemara says that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to split this brisa from the Reisha, the Seifa. The Reisha represents Rabbi Tarfon, the Seifa Rabbanan, and we'll prove it. The Amar Le Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda. We're talking at a Mishnah later on at Daf Tes Vav and Beis, and Shmuel says to Rabbi Yehuda, they used to call Rabbi Yehuda Shidinoi, the sharp one. Shvok. Shvok means don't even bother working on something, and with tircha, let it go. Masnisin, let it go. Hanach. V'ta abasroi, and come after me, follow me, so to speak. Meaning, interpret it the way I will interpret it. Reish Rabbi Tarfon is Heifer Abanon. So just like Shmuel is going to attribute the Mishnah later on, Reisha Rabbi Tarfon and Seifa Rabbanon, so too with regard to the Brisa of Reb Shimon Elazar and the four Klalim, we can interpret that the four Klalim of Reb Shimon Elazar are not four different scenarios of Chatzas Shutfim, because the Klal Rishon and the Klal Ravi are both referring to the same exact Chatzer that belongs to the Nizak. Just that the Klal Rishon reflects the Shita Rabbi Tarfon, and therefore you pay Nezik Shalom on the first Negicha, and the Klal Ravi reflects the Shita of the Chachamim, and you pay Chatzi Nezik. However, the Gemara now offers another alternative reconciliation of the contradiction between the Brisa of the Klal Rishon and Klal Ravi of Reb Shimon Elazar. Ravina Bishmei de Rav Amar Kula Rabbi Tarfon. In truth, the entire Brisa of Reb Shimon Elazar is Aliba de Rabbi Tarfon. Umay. And what do we do with the Klal Ravi when it says Lo Lazeh Lo Lazeh? It doesn't mean that the Chotzer belongs, as we said before, Legamri, it belongs to the Nizak, but rather Lo Lazeh Lo Lazeh Peiros, Ela Dechad. In other words, they don't have a shutfis in the Chotzer to bring in their Peiros, but Dechad. Dechad means Chakli Echad. It means only the Nizak is allowed to bring in his Peiros. So Lazeh Lazeh Lishvaret. What does it mean Lazeh Lazeh? It means that both the Mazik and the Nizak have rights to bring in their Shvarim. Dilagabi Shein Havile Chatzi Chatzer Nizak. Dilagabi Keren Havile Rishus Harav. As far as Nizkei Shein are concerned, then we consider the Chatzah as if it's a Chatzah Nizak, because he's the only one exclusively who has rights to take in his peiros. And therefore, if his peiros were destroyed, then the mazik has to pay for shein v'regel, and it's ubir b'steach. But as far as Keren is concerned, since they both are allowed to bring in their shvarim, it becomes a reshus harabim, and therefore you pay chatzi nezek on the first three negichos. That's even according to Rabbi Tam. Frek the Gemara, hachi, if it's true, then why did the Brisa say arba klolin? There's only shlosha klolin, because basically the first and the fourth klal are identical. Let's go over that. As far as shein is concerned, we have a chatzah that's considered the reshus of the nizak. And therefore, in the klal rishon, we've already formulated the din that shein is chayav b'chatzah nizak. L'gabi keren, we said that this reshus is considered reshus harabim because both the mazik and the nizak have reshus to bring in their shvarim there. And that was already clarified in the klal shlishi that keren is chayav b'reshus harabim. And the Gemara answers, Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and here we turn to Daf Yudalad Amid Beis, Shlosha Klolos Bi'arba Makomos. There are three categories of Rishuyos that are different one from the other as far as the Chiv Nizakin. There's number one, the Rishus HaNizak, number two, the Rishus HaMazik, and then number three, the Rishus HaShutfin. And you're right, there are only three Klolos. But as far as the Dinim are concerned, Bi'arba Makomos, they're counted as four because besides the three categories of Rishuyos, there are Chilukei Dinim. For example, Lagabi Shein V'Regel, the din of the Rishus HaNizak is one din, and as far as Keren, it's got a different din. So Rishus HaMiyuchedes L'Shneim L'Shvarim, but only the Nizak has Rishus for Peiros, that's an entirely different din.